Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video I'm going to show you the new stereo head unit I put in the Tacoma, how awesome it is, and why I removed my top of the line Entune unit. Hope you like it. Alright, this beautiful new unit right here is a Kenwood DMX907s, which is one of the most affordable aftermarket head units you can get that has wireless Android Auto and wireless Apple CarPlay, which is huge. That was one of the big factors I wanted out of a radio. So I'm going to talk about all kinds of stuff in this video. I'm going to go over why this radio is so cool and all the features it has. I'm going to go over the install, things that were and were not plug and play, things I've changed up a little bit from a normal install. I'll talk about the stock radio and why I decided to get rid of it, because this truck was basically fully loaded from the factory. It had the navigation, the satellite radio, the JBL sub, all that kind of stuff, which I kept the sub and the amp, of course, but you know, that's still a nice radio to get rid of, so why would I do that? I'm going to talk about all of that. Some of the really nice features that it has, obviously, like I said, wireless Apple CarPlay, wireless Android Auto. I personally am an Android guy, but if you are an iPhone person, good for you. It'll work great with both. You can also do wired Android Auto and Apple CarPlay if that's your thing. Charge your phone. I don't think there's any benefits to connecting one versus the other, but I did use an adapter on this install so I could still use the factory USB plug. The radio itself has a lot of nice features. Let's get into some of those. First, the Apple CarPlay. That is so awesome. You have the ability to open your Spotify or Pandora playlists if that's your thing. You can also pull up apps like Audible or things like that. You know, audio books. There's Libby, Overdrive, where you can get books from the library, audiobooks. All those will work with Android Auto. There's also Google Maps, which is probably the one main reason to get Android Auto. Great navigation to be able to have up here on your screen, playing through the car speakers, just straight out of the box. It's awesome. Speaking of maps though, there's one app that I really wish was on Android Auto, but is not, and that is Backcountry Navigator Pro. That's the app that I personally use for all my trail running, backcountry kind of stuff. You can download topo maps, save waypoints, record trails, things like that. Google is pretty strict about what kind of navigation software they'll allow on their Android Auto, and it's basically just Google Maps and Waze, which they own, coincidentally. If you're an Apple CarPlay person, there is one more that you can get, which is Gaia, which is a different topo map software. It also works great. So that's one plus in the column for the Apple guys. Most modern radios like this as well have the option to add a module called Maestro RR, and it is insanely powerful, all the things that this module can do. One, it's the way that you retain your factory steering wheel controls if you have those, although there are other cheaper adapters. But the other things the Maestro can do is it'll talk to your vehicle. So a lot of more modern vehicles than this, they will have their climate controls all inside the factory radio, so if you replace those, you have to have a way to do that still. And this radio can do that through the Maestro RR. It'll connect to the ECU through the OBD port, and you can see things like your gauges and temperatures and pressures. There's also a separate screen you can go to see all of your tire pressure sensors, which for second gen Tacoma guys is really cool, because from the factory, the only TPMS light or information you get is just a little light in the gauge cluster there. But through this radio, you can see individual tire pressures. So that's pretty cool. You can also scan and clear engine codes through this screen as well. The Maestro RR module is also what lets you reuse the factory amp and sub if you have the JBL package, which I do rather, as well as the factory steering wheel controls like I mentioned. This radio also has a lot of camera inputs. I think there's 4 plus a dash cam, so 5 total inputs. The dash cam is like a Kenwood specific dash cam. That's not what I have a separate one. But if you do that, it unlocks certain features like collision detection, forward warning kind of stuff, which is pretty cool, but I didn't end up doing that. The only camera input that I have hooked up right now is for the backup camera. And my truck is a 2013. For Tacomas between the years of 2012 and 2013, the factory backup screen was not in the radio itself. It was on all the years after that, But for 12 and 13, the screen was actually in the rearview mirror here. And what that meant was that the camera in the tailgate was actually able to be a really low quality camera from Toyota, because it was such a small screen, it doesn't need a lot of resolution. So there are ways that you can splice into the factory backup camera signal and display it on a new head unit, like I have here. However, when you do that, like I said, the factory camera is so bad that it's just going to be a terrible image. So what I ended up doing was actually replacing that camera in the tailgate with an aftermarket one that was meant to work with these radios that came with the RCA connector all ready to go. One quick note while I'm editing. All this that I'm talking about with replacing the camera or splicing connections is only applicable for 2012 and 2013 Tacomas. If you have a 2014 or above where the screen is in the radio itself from the factory, you're good to go. Adapters will make all that work for you. No wiring involved. Plug and play. One other thing that I forgot to mention while I was recording was that the best part about this whole camera setup for me is that there's a button on the radio, a camera button, that I can cycle through all the active inputs, and I can look at this rear view camera while I'm driving forward or parked whenever, which is great for me because with the camper I can't see out of the back of the truck. So that basically is my rear view mirror. And being able to look at that while I'm going down the highway is really nice. Another really cool feature about the backup screen on this one is that it takes inputs from the steering wheel that are adjustable as well as the grid lines that this truck never had that kind of feature from the factory. And you'll have to just set that up for your individual vehicle, you know, test how much you're actually turning. But it's a pretty neat feature. I really like that. Anyway, that's a really good segue into the install for this. I got everything through Crutchfield, and they have a fantastic option where you can get what's called our ReadyHarness, and they'll take whatever modules and adapters you buy at the same time, and they'll combine all that with the harness that comes with the radio, and pre-wire, pre-solder everything, make all the connections, because modern radios are so complicated. It's not just connect the red to the red and the black to the black and the pink to the pink and the purple, etc. They're not like that anymore. They are to some degree, but there's so much more interfacing. I think the ReadyHarness they sent me had probably 6 or 7 different modules and plugs connected to it, and I'm really happy that they did that for me. By the way, not sponsored at all, just a happy customer. And that really simplified the install. 90% of it was plug and play. It was awesome. There were a few things, however, that were not plug and play. Number one was the satellite radio, or GPS antenna rather, is a slightly different plug. And because my truck had the factory navigation and satellite radio, I had the antenna already on the truck, and I didn't really feel like adding another one aftermarket from Kenwood. You totally can do this if you choose to, but I did not want to. Now, there weren't any available adapters to make the factory plug work with the Kenwood radio, so what I ended up doing was splicing in the connections, which was a new experience for me on splicing a coax cable. And I ended up splicing the factory connections to make the factory antenna talk with the radio, and that worked great. And you do need a GPS antenna because otherwise Android Auto won't work. There's one other area of this radio that was not plug and play, and that is the parking wire signal, because this radio, before you can do any of the setup with Android Auto or anything like that, it needs to know that the truck is in park. And for some reason, the plug on the factory radio for this truck that had the park signal wire was on its own complete 18-pin plug with just a single wire. It's the weirdest thing. But I did not have an adapter that would plug into that one. So I had a decision to make. I could either splice the feed wire coming out of the radio into that as it was supposed to be, or what I also found out was that park signal wire is just a ground. So if you instead connect the wire coming out of the radio that it expects to receive a park signal, instead connect that into the ground, then the radio thinks the truck is always in park. And that gives you access to things that you can only do in park. Like I said, some Android Auto features, some setup. If you have a USB plugged in, you can watch movies or whatever. Not that I would recommend that. Don't do that. But I'm saying you can do those things if you want to. So those were the 3 things: the backup camera, the satellite radio connection, and that park signal wire that were not plug and play. Everything else, it was great. There were a lot of modules and adapters, of course, so it took me a while to test fit and look at the wiring diagram, figure out what went where. but it all ended up working. I'm going to put a list in the description of all the modules and adapters I had to buy for this. For example, there was the radio itself, obviously, the Maestro RR module, which was another big item on the overall ticket. There's an adapter package you can get for the Maestro RR that's meant for Toyotas, and I had to get that as well. The aftermarket backup camera I got, which was optional. There was an adapter I got to reuse the factory USB outlet. I'll put that in as well. That's all I can think of. I think that's about it. Alright, so let's move on now and talk about why I replaced the factory radio. Because like I said, it was pretty much the top of the line model. It had the navigation, satellite radio, the JBL package, which I retained. But why would I get rid of that? First of all, the Bluetooth on that setup was incredibly unreliable. It would drop connection all the time. It would kind of lose continuity between the device, the phone, and the radio. So like if I wanted to go to the next song or something like that, it would not always do that, or it would kind of freak out and pause and disconnect. That was sometimes, but you know, sometimes is worse than never, so I didn't like that. Also, I never used the satellite radio, so that wasn't a big deal for me. The factory Toyota navigation was just as useless as you've seen in any other car from the mid to late 2000s until recently, where these Android Auto units are available. It was cumbersome to enter in any sort of destination or add addresses. You couldn't just pin a point on a map and navigate there. Also, the maps themselves didn't update. So this truck is a 2013, which means the most recent map setup I had was from 7 years ago at this point. And the area where I live right now wasn't on the map 7 years ago. So I couldn't even enter in a home address into my factory radio. So it was time to go. The factory head unit though was a pretty good high-end unit, like I said. So I ended up being able to sell it on eBay for almost as much as I paid for this whole new setup, which worked out really well. Not quite covering it, but hey, I'll take it. That's awesome. Anyway, that is the new setup in my truck, and I really hope you guys like that. I think it's pretty cool, and I'm really excited to go on longer trips with it. It's going to be really nice. So if you liked this video, found this interesting or useful, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, downvote the shit out of it. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.